Well, good evening and welcome to our virtual town hall. So good to have you here. We're going to have a chat with Danielle Smith tonight. We're going to talk about all of the issues and give you a chance to put your questions on the screen. And we're also going to talk to some MLAs, and you can see them all on the screen just before I introduce them. Let me personally say good evening to you. My name is Bruce McAllister. I'm a former MLA in Chestermere Rocky and broadcaster of the Morning News on Global Calgary and other media outlets. And nowadays, I run my own public affairs communications company, and I've been supporting Danielle and agreeing to do a couple of these town halls for her. Interested to get to the questions tonight, but just before we get to you guys, I want to say this. The deadline is approaching to buy your UCP membership. So if you want to vote for the next premier, you have until midnight tonight to do so. So go to daniellesmith.ca, buy your $10 membership, get your friends, get your family, everybody you know to buy one. Let's support Danielle on her way to becoming the next premier. And with that, I will introduce our three guests in no particular order. Maybe I'll start with the best looking. We'll start with Casey Madu in Edmonton Southwest, who is the current minister, of course, of Labor and Immigration, and former Justice Minister. We've got Pat Rain from Leicester Slave Lake, and we've got Nathan Neudorf as well from Lethbridge East. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. You hear me okay?
Hear you great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bruce. Good to be here.
Good to see the three of you. Minister Madu, I want to start with you. You're a big name in Alberta circles and a prominent minister, and you've done some great things for Alberta. You're very well known, and you've chosen to come alongside and walk with Danielle and support her leadership bid. Why?
Bruce, that is the question that I sought to answer last night at the endorsement. It's been a difficult 3 years for all of us, for our province. And I have carefully watched all of the leadership candidates. I have carefully followed their views on all that have transpired in the last 4 years, the direction of our party and province, and more than anything else, the future of our party when it comes to unity. Because I fundamentally believe that we as Conservatives have no choice but to be united, and we must end the division that oftentimes threaten Conservatives when it comes to elections and the future of our province. Danielle, without question, Bruce, comes the closest to being consistent with my own personal views on a wide range of issues. And so that is why whilst it was a difficult decision, but it was one that I think is in the best interest of our province and people.
Well said, Casey. Thank you. And I think a lot of people agree with you and are certainly on side. I want to ask you a bit of a tougher question. Gotten to know about you a little bit the last couple of years, and you're a faithful man. And the last couple of years through COVID have been very difficult. How to phrase this? When you see the jailing of pastors and the mandates and the things that we have gone through, knowing your views, where has Casey Madu's heart been as we've gone through this?
Bruce, that is a question that I have thought hard and long in the last 3 years. I am a person of faith. Those who know me will know that there is no chance that I will ever support any decision, any legislation or regulation that will lead to the arrest of pastors, the shutting down of churches, or the imprisonment of pastors in our province. I have agonized over these decisions. But I think it's important for people to know that if they know who Casey Madu is, they will know that I will not be a part to any decision that will lead to the arrest of pastors and the shutdown of churches in Alberta.
Excellent. Very well spoken and very well communicated. I think most people can relate. Casey, thank you. Pat, I'll jump over to you next. You made the decision. I'll ask the same thing I asked Minister Madu. Why? What led you to backing Danielle?
Well, as the leadership race started maturing and they started rolling out their campaigns and what they stood for. Danielle came forward with a very positive campaign with a lot of specifics, whereas I felt the other candidates weren't coming forward with many specifics. And it turned into a type of race where everybody was attacking Danielle's platforms and what she was bringing out, which were some, I think, great novel ideas that Albertans have really started to buy into. And I myself started to buy into them too. She had a detailed platform, so she was very clear that she was going to fight for Alberta's constitutional rights in many levels, talking about the Sovereignty Act and talking about fighting and standing up for our resources, starting saying that she would stand up and make sure that censorship wasn't something within Alberta borders that Trudeau and Ottawa was going to enforce. She took a strong stance also on gun ownership, saying, and I'm a Northern MLA and outdoors people. I have a lot of outdoor constituents that are responsible gun owners. And that really resonated with many of them and myself. And her commitment, she was very clear on where she stood when we talk about COVID and what's going to happen. She's very clear saying that she's committed to no more lockdowns or segregations of society between vaccinated and non-vaccinated, and that's extremely important too to myself and many of my constituents. So, like I say, many points she was brave enough to come out and be specific on, where I think a lot of the other candidates weren't putting forward specifics to the Alberta public in general, and that's what brought me over to support her, and I think many Albertans also felt the same way.
Quick follow-up, Pat. What are you hearing from your constituents?
Well, what I'm hearing from my constituents is that they do want to change. They want a genuine change. A lot of them talked to me, and we had the pleasure of having Travis Taves come through our constituency. But many of them are saying that it seems too much like Jason Kenney, similar people coming on the campaign, and a similar, basically a very similar way of running the business, the government business of government, and they do want to change. And that's what I'm hearing is many of my constituents are in support of what Danielle Smith stands for and what she is campaigning on. So I'm getting a lot of positive feedback on my choice of endorsing Danielle, and many of my constituents feel the same way.
Pat, thank you. And if you're just joining the call tonight, the cast with us here, Danielle's going to join us shortly. I want you to know that we're just talking to three MLAs, one being a minister with the government, about their reason to come and support Danielle's leadership bid. And Nathan, I'd be remiss if I didn't get to you. Your thoughts and what made you make the big decision from a caucus standpoint to say, look, Danielle's the right premier for Alberta?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Appreciate the question and you taking time to do this evening. For me, it boils down to a very simple thing, really, is Danielle took the time to listen. She took the time to listen to all of our colleagues, all 60 of us across the province. I believe she's contacted and spoke personally with nearly all of them by this point. And I felt she listened. And she understands the strength of our caucus. The last couple of years have been really difficult on all of us. And we've had to battle with COVID-19 and the pandemic and all of those issues. But there's been a lot of really good work done by a lot of really good people that don't necessarily get the credit or the understanding from the general public what they've done and work behind the scenes, particularly a lot of our private members working hard on committees and task force behind the scenes. And she took the time to listen to us and to them and can build the work back up that the team, the whole is greater than the part. And that really meant a lot to me. And I think my colleagues here this evening and those you spoke to earlier today.
Nathan, I may know the answer to this, but I want to hear it in your own words. I sat with Danielle, as you know, as an MLA in Chestermere Rockview, which is now Chestermere Strathmore. I know what her skill sets are and her abilities are. A lot of people are questioning unity in the UCP. You think Danielle can pull everybody together?
I think she can, because she recognizes the limitations of what she can do as one person. And like I said before, she's using the strength of all of caucus to work on that unity, to touch each individual and draw out their strengths, to touch each individual, to acknowledge their hard work and draw them into the team. One of my favorite authors is Jordan Peterson, a great Canadian, great Albertan, and he talks a lot about the power of your voice and what you try to express. When we don't listen to somebody, when we extinguish their ability to communicate, we really can do some damage. So the power in listening, the power in developing that team, the power that Danielle has put into play by contacting each MLA individually, by drawing them out, by listening to them, and not just hearing words, but hearing their heart, hearing their efforts, hearing their passion, their vision, their goals, their values. I think we heard that from Casey just a few moments ago, and from Pat, some of the things that they value and that their constituents value, and she's given that value as well. I think that's a great starting block. We understand that not everybody's going to agree on everything all of the time, but the power of listening and acknowledging where they're at is a great place to start, adding respect to them and values them. And from there, we've got the building blocks to build our team back into a strong, unified party to go into the next general election.
Well said. Listen, Minister Madu, Nathan, Mr. Newdorf, pardon me, and Mr. Rain, sure appreciate you guys showing some courage and leadership and standing up for your constituents and Albertans. Listen, we're going to bring Danielle in here momentarily. Just want to say sincerely thank you, the three of you, for coming on tonight and for speaking for Albertans and for standing up for Danielle and as her choice for premier. So good evening to the three of you.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce.
Take care, Bruce.
Great to have those gentlemen joining us tonight. And I imagine in the background somewhere is Danielle Smith listening, thinking, gee, that's a really nice things about me. And some pretty darn qualified people of substance. Danielle, good evening to you. That must have felt nice to hear your thoughts and reaction on Minister Madu and Mr. Rain and Mr. Newdorf.
Oh, those guys are so great. You know what's been so wonderful in this role that I've had is just getting to know each of the caucus members. And every time I talk to a new one, I think, where have you been? Because you are brilliant and you have so much to offer. I can tell you, I'm just going to brag a little bit about them as well, because Nathan Newdorf, I've known him for quite a number of months, and he's been doing a tremendous job of keeping caucus together as caucus chair, and it has not been an easy job, I can tell you that. So he's got great friendships with all of caucus, and I know you asked him them all the question about unity. He's going to be really key in making sure that we can keep that together. Plus, he also has expertise in the construction industry, and he's already connected me in with the Construction Association so that they can give some feedback on some of the issues they're having with government and how to solve them. So I'm so delighted that he's an advisor to me. Pat Rain is a new friend. I just have only recently met him as the leadership race started. And what an interesting history he has. First of all, he is the healthiest guy in caucus. Yes, he used to be a phys ed teacher, and so he exercises and makes sure he hits the gym, and he's been doing it for literally decades. So he then went on, though. He also has a forestry background. He's one of these, you know how you hear about these pioneer 100-year ranches? He's like a 100-year woodlot owner with his family heritage. And so I've learned so much about the forestry business from him. But he's also a crane operator, or a crane company operator. So I think he said he's got over 80 cranes. And sadly, he had to move them down to the U.S. for much of the last little while. But the good news is he's able to bring them back. So just such a breadth of information and wealth of knowledge that he brings to our caucus too. And then, of course, Casey Madu. I was actually expecting to have to run up against him in this leadership when we were talking about the different names that people were thinking might put their name forward. I always said, "Oh my goodness, Casey Madu. He's one of the guys I'd like to see run," because I could always tell, especially from the respectful way that he answered questions when Todd Lowen put it to him. I could tell that we knew that there were a few guys behind the scenes who were really trying to argue on our behalf. It's not always easy to do when you're in a position in cabinet, but I can tell you that I know that Casey is 100% on board going into the fall session, making sure we do not lock down again, we do not have restrictions, and we ensure that we find a different pathway forward. So I'm just so delighted that he's got that cabinet level experience, but he's in the role right now of citizenship and immigration. And when I think about some of the problems that we've had in our province in being able to attract qualified workers, I've been talking about this for years and years, about how we can create a stream of new Canadians that are able to match the jobs that we have here in construction and in forest, or in farming, in labor, in hospitality, in the healthcare industry. And I know that he was just at a conference out east with his counterparts. And there's a lot of other provinces that are talking along the same lines we are, that Quebec manages its own immigration, Manitoba manages its own immigration. Immigration is our principal authority under Section 95 of the Constitution. Let's figure out how we can do that too, so that we can better match the needs of our economy with the folks who want to be here. So I just feel like we've got such a fantastic team, and I'm so glad that they're advising me at this early stage. It's just terrific to have them on board.
Love it. Want to mention, Danielle, give me a sec here to the people at home, to those of you watching and listening. You can put your questions on the screen. You go ahead and click in and log in with your question. We're going to get to as many as we can tonight with Danielle. I think what's important to reiterate, you'll hear me do this throughout our cast here, is that today is the deadline. Look, it's midnight tonight. If you want to buy a membership and if you want to have a say in who the next premier of this province is, you've got till midnight tonight to do it. Go to daniellesmith.ca. You can click there. You can buy the $10 membership. I would encourage you, Facebook, whatever it is, get a hold of your friends, get a hold of your relatives, get a hold of your neighbors. You've got until midnight tonight to do that.
Hey, Bruce, can I make an admission too? Because
yes.
As I was waiting and listening to your interview, my husband had told me earlier today he wanted to buy a membership. So I've managed, you have to understand, Bruce and my husband work together in the media business.
I can see it.
People who have been in media do not like to buy partisan memberships, but he's making an exception for me this time. And so since family members are allowed to buy memberships for other family members, I went online and bought him a membership.
Well, David, if you're listening tonight, it's about time, my friend. I'm glad to hear that you did. Hey, let me ask you a tough question out of the gate. You good for that?
Yeah, for sure.
I like many people, am concerned about WEF, the World Economic Forum, and its influence on global policy, on local policy, on some of the things that we see going on in the world. And when it comes to WEF, environmental policy, where do you stand on these things, and what would you like to put into context on those issues?
Yeah, I sometimes make a joke about it when I say I'm not a young global leader of tomorrow, but there's really no joking matter about this. I mean, when you look at Pierre Poilievre has taken a really strong stand, saying that no one in his government would be allowed to go to these international forums or be involved in them in any way. I agree. We shouldn't be involved with that organization. It may have been, and I've been watching these global thought leadership groups, like they like to call themselves, for a lot of years. And I kind of thought, okay, well, you get a bunch of billionaires together with their big tech friends, and you've got politicians who want to go there. They talk. It's like a policy seminar, and then they walk away and nothing happens. But something has happened. They are very, very influential in having changed the entire world discussion about about this whole concept of stakeholder capitalism, which is not the same thing as real capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism is this idea that there's a bunch of technocratic elites. They know how to manage your affairs better than you do, that you will own nothing and you will be happy, and they will just allow you to have a guaranteed basic income. And don't worry, Big Brother will take care of you. And the worry that I have is that when you see what's happened over the last couple of years, it's pretty clear that they have had a huge influence on this current government. People are very worried about digital IDs. They're worried about central bank digital currencies. They're worried about what China is doing. with social credit scores, and if that's going to happen here. And I have to tell you, the federal government didn't do itself any favors when they started seizing and freezing bank accounts of people who had just contributed to the Freedom Convoy. So I feel like, you know, everybody downplays the role of the World Economic Forum, but Klaus Schwab has been pretty open. He has written a book that you can get on Amazon called COVID-19: The Great Reset. I mean, why is he linking these two things? Why is he writing books about this? He certainly has a lot of influential friends who are fellow travelers, and they're trying to have a huge influence on our national and international politics. And we want none of it, especially if it means that we are exposing ourselves to the kind of authoritarian type of actions that we've seen in the last couple of years. I want nothing to do with them. On the environment more generally, though, I wrote my first study on the environment when I was with the Fraser Institute called Environmental Indicators for Canada and the US. I wrote another study when I was at the CFIB on eco-prosperity, about how small business believed that you would be able to have both economic growth and environmental health at the same time. So those really shaped my views. And I just believe, as a conservative, someone who loves our beautiful outdoor spaces, that the less stuff we put into the atmosphere, the water, onto the land, the better. And if we can reduce any of those emissions, we should. But we should do it in a way that makes sense for us. And the way that makes sense for us is by making sure that the world has access to our clean LNG, so that we can reduce wood and dung and coal, which are far more polluting fuels. It means that we can invest in technology. The Ottawa elites don't seem to know this, but we are world leaders in hydrogen and carbon capture and other technologies. And we also are a world leader in what they are now calling nature-based solutions. When you look at all the carbon sequestration that happens in our soils and our grasslands and our forests and our cropland, those are the kind of things that I can really get behind. And I think everybody wants to see an environment that is clean and healthy, where we can go out and enjoy the great outdoors. And I think we just have to do it our way, because the World Economic Forum way and the Justin Trudeau way, they just want to shut our industries down, and we can't have that.
That's it. We're innovators, aren't we? Don't Albertans always find the solutions?
We always do. We absolutely do. I remember I often talk about this, because when I was growing up, acid rain was supposed to kill us all. And then some brilliant innovator came up with scrubbers for sulfur dioxide. Then the ozone layer was depleting, and that was because of fluorocarbons. And some brilliant innovator came up with an alternative so that we could still have air conditioning. So I just think that innovation is the answer to anything. And when I see what is happening with our incredible business community, we've got Dow Chemical, we've got Air Products, we've got the Pathways Project with our oil sands project. They are coming up with amazing innovations that will allow for us to reduce emissions and still feel really proud about the industry we have.
Love it. Glad we addressed it. Look, I'm asking for comments from you at home. If you want a question, if you want to ask Danielle a question, you certainly have a forum to do it tonight. I'm going to get to as many as I can. Danielle, first a comment from a viewer, and then a question, okay? The comment's coming in from Sandra Falcone, and Sandra says, Danielle is the most relatable and authentic candidate I have listened to in a long time. Get this. I considered myself a liberal, but as a regular listener of her show for years, I have no reservations about supporting her for this election. Her deep understanding of a broad range of topics always amazes me. Sandra, thank you. If it's one thing I say to people when they ask me about Danielle, I say it's depth. She forgets more than I know. Now, here's the question. The question is from Cheryl Reichert, and Cheryl asks, good question. If you get something wrong, Danielle, will you do a Ralph Klein and admit it?
Oh boy, I have gotten so much wrong. And, you know, for people who haven't heard me talk about the decision I made in 2014 that just caused so much damage. I know that that Jim and I, when we made the decision to try to bring these two parties together, we were trying for unity. You were part of that conversation, Bruce. You know, we were trying for unity, but we did it the wrong way. We did it from the top down rather than the bottom up. Tried to do it faster than the public was ready for it. And boy, did we all get punished. I mean, I lost my nomination, and Jim Prentice lost the election, and we ended up with Rachel Notley for 4 years. And so there's a lot of people who wonder what could have happened in 2015 if we'd done things differently. I don't know what would have happened, but I can tell you what would happen today is that when you look at how the the vote has coalesced around the NDP, and the fact that they have maintained, I don't think I've seen a poll that has them less than 30% or 35% in the last couple of years. If we now see this movement split apart again after all the pain and blood and sweat and tears everybody went through, it would just all be so damaging. And that's part of what I saw, and why I wanted to jump back in is I felt like the same divisions that we were seeing back in the Wild Rose days were emerging again for a lot of the same reasons. That when rural Alberta feels it's not being listened to, they create a new party. And rural Alberta was not being listened to, not on lockdowns, not on the issues of autonomy. And so I wanted to be that strong voice saying, hey, look, this is a party that is worth preserving. This is a movement that is worth saving. And we've got to stick together. We have had some differences. We've had some wrong turns in the last couple of years. But I can tell you, when you think, would anything have been better under Rachel Notley? She was the one who was pushing for harder, faster, harsher, longer lockdowns. And I can guarantee you that if we end up with a similar type of problem with a respiratory virus surge and patients in the fall, I have no doubt if she was premier, she'd be locking us down right back into it. So we can't allow that to happen. That's the reason why I felt it was so important for us to get back together. So yes, admitted my error. I'm so pleased that so many people have forgiven me. Not everyone. I've made some mistakes. People know that I like to blue sky on a lot of issues. Sometimes I get some real clangers or misspeak. I'd like to apologize if I hurt anybody, but I always feel like if we have the conversation, we talk things through, that we will get to a consensus. We'll get to understanding each other. I just don't want to live in a world where everybody is so terrified of every word that comes out of their mouth that they're not going to be having honest, sincere conversations. That's the fear that I have over the last couple of years, is this cancel culture has gotten so brutal. I always feel like if you make a mistake, wrong, sorry, won't happen again. There's got to be a pathway for redemption for all of us. There's got to be a pathway back for those of us who are pure of heart, who want to make a difference in this province.
Well, if you talk to, and thank you for that, Danielle, I think if you talk to anybody with wisdom that's been around a few years, they will tell you that you learn far more from mistakes than you do your successes. And
you know what I loved about talk radio, Bruce? It was so good, because when I did make a mistake, holy Dinah, did someone let me know immediately. It was quick correction, because someone would call in and say, you didn't get this right. Or someone would send a text, right? I'd say, no, you got to talk to this other guy. He's got a better idea. And that was what I loved so much about talk radio, was that exchange of ideas.
You did, and you would. Listen, you mentioned lockdowns just a minute ago, so I'm going to jump ahead a couple of questions. Guys, stay with me if you're putting them on the screen, but I want to jump ahead to Mike's question, because Mike asks, he says, I'm all for no more lockdowns, Danielle. The question is, if we get another pandemic or another wave of COVID and the hospitals start to be overrun, what would you do?
I can tell you exactly what I would do. I was actually having a conversation with members of our continuing care services, because I've been trying to figure out how we create the surge capacity that AHS has so far failed to do. This is the thing that really bothers me about Alberta Health Services, is that we gave them direct instruction, the Premier did, to expand surge capacity. And the numbers were there: 761 more ventilators, 1,081 more ICU beds. And they didn't do it. In fact, when the Delta surge came, they came clean and said, whoops, actually, we've decreased the number of ICU beds. So I've been talking to a lot of people about how we're supposed to address this. And the number one thing that I keep hearing is that we have a lot of capacity in acute care beds, but we have long-term care patients who are awaiting permanent placement in long-term care homes that are actually in our acute care beds in hospitals. It's something like 60% of the beds are filled with people who are awaiting long-term placement. And I have to figure there's got to be a more comfortable place for them to go. I was thinking maybe a hotel would be a better environment. Well, when I talked to the continuing care folks today, they said that we may, in a lot of facilities, we have about 20 to 30% excess capacity. And they would be more than happy to provide some kind of transition housing so that we can free up those beds, so that we have the capacity, so that when patients come into the emergency room, we can get them moved through, so that we're not doing hallway medicine. And then when we don't have a respiratory virus season surge, now have extra capacity so that we can start catching up on some of the surgeries that we haven't been able to do, that are backlogged. And that's only one problem. The one thing I really want to do is get Alberta Health Quality Council they're kind of the oversight agency that reports directly to the health minister. I want them to go out to all of our hospitals. We've got 106 of them, and tell me how many patients are who should be waiting for long-term care are in acute care beds. Number one. Number two, how many operating rooms have we mothballed or not put into service or have turned into storage facilities? Because when I visited with Pat, he took me from Wabasca and Slave Lake up to High Prairie. High Prairie has a brand new hospital, 4 years old. There's 2 operating rooms that have never been put into service. So you have to ask the question, why is that? And then the other area too is that anywhere I go in the province, I also hear about wings of hospitals that have been shut down or floors that have been decommissioned. If we have the capacity here, we should be using every hospital to our full capacity, because there was a study that came out a couple of days ago saying that we were considering sending surgical teams to the Okanagan. And I figure if we're going to be sending surgical teams and their patients anywhere, let's be sending them to High Prairie or Grand Prairie or Milk River and making sure that we're using those hospitals and building the capacity of our surgical centers down there. So I think that we need to have a really solid look at what's going on with our facilities, and I think we'll find the answers.
You doing okay so far? We got a lot of questions.
Am.
Okay,
Yeah.
folks at home, daniellesmith.ca. Remember, midnight tonight is your last chance to buy a membership. If you want to vote, if you want to have a say in who becomes our next premier, if you'd like to support Danielle, go to daniellesmith.ca and buy your membership for $10. You've got to do so before midnight. Next question. I would like you to address the outrageous utility bills. It's not the charge for usage. Hang with me. It's not the charge for usage I object to. It is all the other charges on the electric bill.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure in the 30 years I've owned my home, I paid as much in transmission fees as I did for my house. I just received my gas bill. Usage was $50. My bill was $130. That's from Beverly, Danielle.
You know, it is the transmission and distribution charges that have just escalated beyond control. And I think it's probably the same thing on the natural gas side that we're seeing on the electricity side. One of the things, and I've already started talking to some of the big power generators about how we might be able to solve this problem, and some of the transmission companies. Think of it this way. The biggest issue I think we're facing is that we built way too much transmission and distribution way before we needed it. You remember we fought those two big DC transmission lines?
I will never forget. Yeah.
Well, we were right. I've apparently been told that they're only operating at 30% capacity. So it may well be that we've pre-built and at some point they'll be up to 100%. But then why make today's ratepayers pay that whole cost? If we're going to have these in operation for 50 or 70 years, why don't we stretch out the amortization to a longer period of time? I think everybody knows how this works. If you've got a long-term mortgage and you squish it down to 10 years versus hold it out over 30 years, you're going to have lower payments. So that would be, I think, one of the biggest ways that we would be able to reduce transmission and distribution. Second way is that we may have to buy out some of this excess transmission that was built. We were the ones who commissioned it. We were the ones who pushed it forward, and the companies in good faith went forward and did it. So if we don't need it and we push them to build it, then maybe that's another way, is you just buy it out from the rate base so that it reduces the bills. The third thing that I've heard is that we made a mistake in 1999 when we were figuring out who was to pay the cost of distribution and transmission. There was a debate: do you put 50% on the generator and 50% on the consumer? Instead, we put 100% on the consumer. And you know what happens is a generator then says, well, I can build this anywhere because all the distribution costs are just going to get flowed through to the customer. If the generator had to pay half the cost, they'd say, maybe I should locate closer to where all the transmission and distribution lines are. And it changes the incentives. So it's a little bit complicated, but do know that I've been studying this since 1999. I did try on my show to bring people up the learning curve on electricity, because it's very complicated, but it's also something that is so urgent for us to solve now. And so I've got a few ideas about how we would go about doing that.
Yep, it is complicated, but Beverly hit it right on the head, didn't she? And that's a great response. I think where there's a will, there's a way to find a solution there. Marianne changes the subject for us, Danielle. She says, what can you do and what would you do to put an end to the revolving doors in our, watch this, injustice system? Mm-hmm. Tired of offenders walking into court and walking out. Thank you.
You know, I have to figure out where this falls in our assertion of our rights under the Constitution, because the criminal code is federal jurisdiction, but the administration of justice is provincial jurisdiction. And I wonder if we can do more to make sure that we're holding justices to account, that we do give the maximum penalty for the most serious crimes, that we do give the maximum penalties for repeat offenders, that if somebody's a danger to society, we don't just let them back out on the streets. I mean, as a woman watching some of these announcements that get done from time to time, where the officers will say, okay, well, we're releasing this guy back onto the street and he's still a danger, protect yourself. That leaves me very unsettled. If that leaves me unsettled, I'm sure it leaves a lot of people unsettled, because you'd be thinking, if we know he's still a danger, why wouldn't we keep him behind bars? This is something that I'll have to talk to that we have a former justice minister who's now on the team. So I'll try to get some idea about where the lines are and how much we would be able to influence that. We only have control, as I understand, over those sentences that are 2 years or less. So it really is more of the minor crimes that we are taking care of. And so that may require a conversation with the federal government so that they start administering the justice on their side of the equation in a way that's more in line with the values we have here.
We're bouncing all over the place, but we're doing it so that you get a chance to get your questions into Danielle tonight. We're giving you the last minute push for memberships because it's midnight tonight is the deadline. Danielle, the next one changes the subject a bit. If you need a drink, if you've got a bottle of water handy, by all means. The question is, and I love this question because a lot of people have been talking about it since you raised it. Can you elaborate on using the Port of Churchill? Are you talking to groups like the Western Energy Corridor, the University of Calgary School of Public Policy's Northern Corridor? I think LNG would be a good fit for Churchill to complete. Sorry, I'm not familiar. Russia's,
I think compete with Russia's.
Yeah, compete with Russia's Yamal terminal. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I'll tell you, actually, when I started talking about economic corridors, I found out that there are a number of groups that are already well advanced in scoping it out, building the partnerships, and figuring out the specifications for how we might be able to build. The notion behind an economic corridor is pretty simple. It's that what we would do is we would solve all the land conflict issues in advance. So we know that we've got a partnership and a negotiation we have to do with our First Nations. We know that we've got issues that we have to deal with other governments like Saskatchewan and Manitoba. We know that there are environmental issues that we have to deal with for caribou habitat and wetlands and water management. And this is why these processes take so long to get anything approved, is that we're asking the companies to try to navigate through all of that. So an economic corridor would say, let's do it first. Let's create the go zone. Let's get the agreement with all of the partners. Let's make sure that First Nations are on board. Let's solve the landowner dispute issues and then say, we're open for business. And then the proponents would come. And I think if we did that, you would see somebody who would be willing to build a new rail line and a new highway. We'd be able to get transmission lines built from Manitoba. We would also be able to build oil and gas pipelines. We would also be able to bring clean drinking water and biodiesel and home heating up to some of our northern communities, and broadband internet access, which is pretty important up there. So the concept, I think, is a brilliant one. And one of the things that I hear from our First Nations partners, and we now have 100 First Nations that have oil and gas development, and they want to get it to market too. They're looking at the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. They're looking at Section 35 Charter rights, and they're saying we have a right to say yes to development. So I think they're going to be an amazing partner, which will help us on economic reconciliation. Now, I've talked to Randy Royer. I just recently wrote about his book. He's created this notion of a provincial autonomous region that would allow for us to essentially establish a new treaty with First Nations. His view is that the port of Nelson in Hudson Bay might be a better port. I think it's open 9 months out of the year, whereas Churchill's open fewer months out of the year. But whichever it is, we do know that there is a group of 14 First Nations that is already talking about this corridor. We know that there's at least 3 or 4 companies that have been looking at how we do the specifications and how we scope out the area. I'm pretty excited. I think that this is going to be the obvious one to do. The next one we'd look at would be going to Thunder Bay, so we have access to the Great Lakes system. I think we can do one up to Tuyaktuk so that we can open up our northern communities. And also, I think there's an opportunity for us to consider doing something to Port-au-Prince Rupert. So the main thing is we've got to just get started. We've been talking about this since the 30s. Ottawa is not going to do it for us. We've got to work with the coalition of the willing to do it ourselves.
I get it. But look, if it's one thing businesses hate, it's governments that make up rules as you go. I love the idea of setting the parameters. Let's fit within these. We'll be flexible somewhat, but we have some options we can explore. So great question and great answer. Okay, Janet wants to know, and she says, well, Danielle, you have our vote. I'm not into candidates bashing everybody to get elected. I'm glad you stated what you stand for, what your plan is, with no bashing. That said, what is your stance on bonuses being paid to government workers for no reason?
Oh, that it's such a black eye, and I gather that we're still having a hard time figuring out who was the ultimate sign-off and signing authority and approver on that. And so I think will ultimately end up finding out who that is, and someone's got to come clean and apologize. I don't know about you, Bruce, but I have been on salary before. And when you're on salary, you just normally don't get paid for overtime. It's just, it's an expectation that you're going to work more than 40 hours a week. You also have bonuses normally that are defined in advance. I had a bonus structure once where as long as we met our revenue targets and our personal goals, we would get a bonus of 5% of what our overall amount of compensation was. Well, this was, I think, close to 50 or 60%. I've never seen anything like it. So when you have that, it just erodes trust. There's two levels that people are so angry about it. One is all the businesses that were shut down, told they couldn't operate, barely hanging on. People have taken out, I've heard, as much as $150,000 to stay afloat. And the lack of any kind of apology or recognition about the pain that has caused to people, that is one of the slaps in the face. The people who have lost their jobs because of vaccine mandates. And remember, Alberta Health Services, they didn't end their vaccine mandate for new hires until just a couple of weeks ago.
That's right.
So when you think about the number of people who lost their jobs, and now they're seeing the people who made those decisions ending up with a massive amount of compensation for it. And then on top of that, oh my goodness, our frontline workers. I mean, we went into COVID with understaffing in so many of our facilities, because I think our model has always been to understaff and then just use mandatory overtime when we have surges. The problem is no one expected we were going to have surges for 2.5 years, and our frontline staff are totally burnt out. We've got fewer and fewer people who even want to work in Alberta Health Services because it's such a toxic environment. We've lost people because of the mandates. We haven't been able to attract people because of the mandates. And we're going into the fall season with even a worse situation than I think we've ever had. I've talked to doctors who said they've never seen it so bad. All of that does not seem to me bonus worthy behavior. Honestly, that is not bonus worthy at all. There should be a little bit of humility about how hard it's been for everybody who's been on the front line and everybody who's been a victim of these decisions. So whoever it is who made the decisions, there's going to have to be some acknowledgement that they made a mistake, and there's going to have to be some reckoning there.
100%. Do we know who signed off on it? Do we know? I
don't think we do. I think it looks like it was a Department of Health decision, because I think officially Dr. Dina Hinshaw reports to the Deputy Minister of Health. But you know what? Rachel Notley signed her employment contract, and so that also implies that there's some role in the top leadership office in making some decisions over compensation. So I think we've got to get to the bottom of that.
Still on healthcare, but a little bit of a different twist here. Very important, though. I know you've heard of this issue before. I'm going to read you a question from Sharon. Sharon asks, rural hospitals have lost many services in the last few years, such as emergency rooms. These need to be brought back to rural hospitals so patients aren't sent to the cities, and city hospitals are subsequently overrun.
100%. Couldn't have said it better myself. I think what has happened, we've gotten away from Peter Lougheed's original vision for this province. And I must tell you that vision was that people should be able to live in any one of our wonderful communities and be able to have good schools and good hospitals and good long-term care facilities. Because if you want to attract workers to a community, you need to be able to attract families, and they need to be able to have a place for their kids. And then when the kids come, the grandparents come too. So you need to make sure you've got the health care and the long-term care for the grandparents also. And for some reason, it seems like the higher ups in Alberta Health Services have been deciding to pull more and more services into Calgary and Edmonton. It's a massive inconvenience for our rural residents. The number of people I've been told who literally go hours to another community to get a simple appointment or a CT scan, or having to come into Calgary or Edmonton for services that really should be available in the regions. It's unacceptable. I mean, why can't we have services, especially birthing centers and midwives and hospitals, able to deliver babies? We used to be able to do this. How is it that we're getting more and more technologically advanced and we're not able to provide these services? That makes no sense to people. It looks to me like it's just we're running a system for the ease of the administrators rather than the service to patients. And that's part of the reason why we've got to completely rethink how we deliver services, getting back to local hospital boards, back to local decision making. Because I guarantee you, if we do that, we will end up with better services in every single region.
It's a great question. And I'm just looking ahead to the next three. They're all on different subjects. Let's start with this one. How about our own police force? How long would it take to get that going? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think we could do it immediately. I noticed that the current Solicitor General and Justice Minister has launched a website about the Alberta Provincial Police and has been doing a lot of work talking to the municipalities about why they would benefit. For me, you have to remember, I was in High River during the gun grab, and trying to get accountability over who made the decision for that has been really difficult. And especially when we, even after it was all over, and they removed the staff sergeant, and they removed the head of K division. When they brought in a new staff sergeant, we didn't even get consulted on, or our police committee didn't even have a say on who that was. We also, in my town, in High River, we have a detachment that closes at 10 o'clock at night. So when there's a crime after 10 o'clock at night, we have to wait until Okotoks can dispatch somebody to come see us.
Wait a second. What's the population in High River?
13,000 people.
Oh my goodness, that's got to be frightening. Yeah. Okay.
Oh
sorry.
yeah. So I can't even. So for people who live in Calgary and Edmonton, the idea that we would be without this kind of basic service, I mean, you have to understand it's unsettling, and I think we can do better if we were to take more control over it. The other thing that I'm very, very worried about is how the federal government is administering the Firearms Act, because I've talked to Terry Bryan, who's our chief firearms officer. She's of the view that because property and civil rights are provincial jurisdiction, that we can take control over the administration of the Firearms Act. Rather than send all of our applications to Miramichi and have them slow rolled, new applications, I'm told, are taking months or years to get processed. Let's process them here so that we can make sure that those who are responsible firearms owners are able to enjoy their sport, able to go hunting, able to collect. That's one of the things that I'm seeing at the federal level. They can't do anything particularly well. Just look at the passport and visa offices as an example. So let's take that off their hands and administer it properly. And then also, an Alberta Provincial Police gives us more control, because when they start their gun confiscation regime, which they want to, then we'll be able to say, you know what, our priority is not confiscating the firearms of law-abiding firearms owners. It's going after gangs. It's going after gun smuggling. It's going after people who are using guns to commit crimes. Those are the things that we think are important to police, not the paperwork crimes that Justin Trudeau wants to support. So that's the other reason why we need to have our own force reporting to us.
Pat Rain, MLA Pat Rain, was discussing, I think it's Lesser Slave Lake, his constituency, and some of those things just before you came on the call. And if you're just joining us, you did miss that earlier. We had 3 MLAs with us, including Casey Madu, who has chosen to support Danielle in her leadership bid. And also Pat Rain was with us, and Nathan Nerdoff, and they all spoke very highly of you, Danielle. I'd love to see them answer this question. I haven't heard this one to you yet, so I'm curious. What will you do with gas prices that keep going up? What can you do about those?
Are you bringing them back in so that you can ask them a question?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Casey that specifically.
Well, let me take a stab at it, because, and I'll pay a compliment to Brian Jean on this one, because he has done so much work actually to be watchdogging what was happening with wholesale prices, and he was the first to see that when the carbon, or when the fuel tax was eliminated, the prices weren't coming down. As a result, the premier even did an investigation and said, you got to flow these prices through, and they did. He's also suggested that we take the royalties off of the gas and diesel that are sold in Alberta. Now, I don't know the mechanics of how easy that would be to administer, but it does seem to me that if we're going to get a huge benefit from royalty revenues coming in, why not give our citizens a benefit and have that flow through? So he's done the most work on that, and I don't know if any of my colleagues here have seen if there's a way to implement that policy in an easy fashion, but I think it's worth looking at.
Gentlemen, any of you want to jump in?
No, let me jump in here. Listen, I agree. I do think that we have to do everything we can to reduce costs on Albertans, especially at this point in time. And I think, Daniel, what Mr. Jean has put forward, it's something worth looking into. I think there's going to be an opportunity for us to look into all of that. But I think what I would say is this. We have to make sure that the taxes that we have removed on the cost of petroleum right now are actually passed on to consumers.
That's it.
And my understanding that is being done, but that there was a time when it wasn't clear as to whether or not that was the case. Right. So we just have to make sure that that is being done and explore other ways. Listen, we make so much money right now from commodity prices, and that is a natural resource that belongs to the people of Alberta, and we have to figure out how we can do more at this point in time that they are going through difficulties.
Nathan Neudorf and Pat Rayner both with us. I know people want to pound you with a whole bunch more questions, but guys, before I let you go, anything you want to add to what you've heard to this point? Did you want to make a general comment on anything?
Well, I would say that I think it's an opportunity for the government to step in, and the processing facilities that are making the final product, maybe we could look at trying to set some type of a processing acceptable fee in there to make sure that whatever they're getting the raw product for and whatever they're marketing up and selling it to the retail gas stations, that it's in line, so they're not maybe scooping too much profit in there. And I think that's what happened, and that's what went on when they said the premier triggered that investigation. They weren't paying the Alberta tax royalty, which they got a break from, but yet they kept the prices high, so they were scooping up the extra profits.
That's it. Nathan, I think we beat this one to death, but is there anything you want to add?
No, not to this conversation. Just earlier point. I think Albertans are expecting us to handle the revenues from these high energy prices with their best interests in mind, and that means that whatever surpluses we have to be saving some of that. We have to be helping them with their extended costs, like Danielle was talking about, electrical transmission and distribution charges. That's our responsibility on behalf of the citizens of Alberta. We have to use that money well, and I think they're expecting that, and that's what I've been hearing tonight.
MLAs Neudorf, Rain, and Minister Madu. Thank you again, guys. I'll back you on out and come back to you, Danielle. This is important that we address. It was rumored that you would bring in a PST. Is that correct?
Look, anytime you have been in the public eye for 27 years, giving your opinion on issues, you could pull up probably a few things that I said that were either out of place for the time or real clangers. And I should tell you, when I did write about when I was open to new revenue generating options, including a PST, was when we had a $24 billion deficit. And we were looking at royalty revenues of only $2 billion. We hadn't fixed the problem that we had with our pipeline access. Our natural gas was trading at negative. Our oil sands was trading at negative. It was in sort of that point in time environment that it was, what are we going to do about this? Because there was no possible way to cut $24 billion out of program spending And it just wasn't responsible to think that we could keep on running $24 billion deficits year after year after year. Now, fortunately, our fortunes have turned around. And so it's a new conversation today. One thing I should say is that Ralph Klein did something really important. He made sure that no one could ever bring in a sales tax without it being affirmed by the people. And the reaction of the people is pretty clear to me, that nobody is interested in having a sales tax. People look at that as part of Alberta's identity. The part of my identity is being debt free. Ralph Klein gave us that. Part of my identity is having a savings plan. Peter Lougheed brought that in, and I don't think it's lived up to its promise. So I wrote a paper a year ago that actually more reflects my views today, because now that we've got $16 billion worth of resource revenue, it's an entirely different conversation. And in this environment, we have to talk about how much of that are we going to spend? Because we're spending $12 billion right now. Is that an appropriate amount of our resource revenue to be spending? How much should we be saving? How much should we be setting aside for debt repayment? How much should we be using for infrastructure payments? I mean, I look at the growth that our province is going to have and the needs in our rural municipalities. Those are the things that we need to talk about. And I'm of the view that I'd like to see our resource revenue roughly split those three different ways. Use a third for infrastructure investment, use a third for savings, and use a third for debt repayment. Yeah. Let's get back on track, because as you start paying down debt, you free up money that's going to interest that can then be used for new spending. As you start putting money in your savings account, you're generating a brand new source of revenue. And one of the columns I wrote in 2001 that no one seems to have dug up, because we were in very similar situation at that time, is let's have an aggressive savings plan so that we can grow our Alberta Sovereign Wealth Fund, is what I'm calling it, to $500 billion.
Yeah, it's a positive headline, so why would they dig it up? Yeah.
Well, there you are. So, but this is what I would love, and I'd love to challenge Albertans to think about this, because if we got started now and we allowed the revenues to generate over time, we could grow it to the same size that Norway has. Norway, I think, is approaching $1 trillion. Imagine if we had $500 billion in that fund and it was generating a 5% return, that's $25 billion. That's enough to eliminate personal income tax and eliminate corporate income tax. So if we did a little bit of belt tightening and savings now, we could really create something quite glorious in about 30 years' time that would be a true legacy to hand off to our kids.
Danielle, we got a comment came in that's frankly rattled me a little bit. I've read it, and I want to read it to you. And I just want to preface it before we put it up on the screen from Kenny. And I want to say COVID was hard on a lot of people. COVID wasn't fair to a lot of people. The fact that Justin Trudeau didn't allow Canadians to travel within their own borders, frankly, wasn't just. And dividing people was wrong. This comes in from Kenny. He says, Danielle, my father got very sick. I had to drive 6,400 kilometers because I couldn't fly in my own country. He passed away. I was 40 minutes from the hospital. I could have been with my mom and him for a few days had I been allowed to fly. I don't know what you want to say to Kenny on that subject, but something tells me you're not going to let that happen again here in Alberta.
We can't. I mean, there's so much trauma that everybody has, and everybody's trauma is different. I think there's lots of families who had the same experience as Kenny, and even closer to home. I mean, he might have been able to get there in time if we hadn't had those dumb travel restrictions. But there are people who weren't even able to say goodbye to, to dying loved ones close to home. I have a person who stopped me in Cardston. And he was really sick with COVID. And so you'd think, okay, well, maybe he'd be in favor of lockdowns. He said, no way. And he started crying, talking about his 80-year-old parents who are dying of loneliness. So even people who have someone close to home haven't been able to see them and haven't been able to support them in long-term care. There's also a group that's been supportive of letting kids be kids is sort of their tagline, Families for Choice. And one of their members is supporting my campaign. They had done a survey of their parents, and 68% of them are worried about the mental health of their kids. I think we have the potential for a generational mental health crisis if we don't deal with it, with the fear, the anxiety, the fact that kids don't have the same social skills, or they're behind where they should be because they haven't been able to interact with each other, all the missed opportunities. Those are the things that we don't do daily counts on, right? We don't do a daily accounting on, but everybody feels that. And that's the reason we can't shut down again. One of the other aspects, and I knew this, and you and I have been talking about this all the way through COVID. I was watching Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida and Governor Kristi Noem in South Dakota. And I just thought, you know what, if they could chart a different course, so could we. Because one of the things they knew was that it wasn't just a matter of balancing lives and livelihoods. It was lives and lives. It was that those who are not able to live through not having that social interaction. We've got people who have mental health, addiction, alcoholism. We've had family breakdown, and that's going to lend to long-term consequences. We've had overdoses and suicides. We've had undiagnosed cancers. Dr. Raj Sherman says that he works in hospital. He works in emergency. And he says you've got people showing up, not with COVID, but sicker because of chronic diseases that they just haven't had checked up for 2 years because they've been too afraid to go see a doctor. Dr. Ari Jaffe tried to warn people. I interviewed him when I was still on the air. He said, you know, the consequences of this type of approach, this lockdown, we're going to have 10 times the number of loss of life years as a result of it than we do from the losses from COVID. So we should have done a better balance. We should have done focused protection. And that's why we know now we just can't lock down our kids, can't lock down businesses. We can't prevent people from, like Kenny, from going to see a dying loved one, getting on a plane. We have to take a different approach.
Yeah. Kenny, sorry you went through that, as Danielle just communicated. And thank you for your strength on this issue, Danielle. I know it's brought a lot of people to you. Listen, before I close and remind people to get a membership and how they can do that, just want to ask you a generic question in closing. How have you felt about things? What are the most important things to you? What would you say to Albertans as we approach the deadline to buy a membership to support you to be our next premier?
Well, a couple of things come to mind. One is I feel like I have never been more prepared to run for public life. And the last 7 years, I've just learned so much by being on talk radio. I wish I'd been on talk radio before I got into politics the first time, because nothing beats being able to talk to a wide range of people from a variety of perspectives. I am sure that I've talked to every single Albertan who has a good idea about how to fix this province. So I know who to go to when we get problems that come up. So that leaves me better prepared. I also know you cannot insulate yourself from Albertans. I made a mistake in the past of being out of step with Albertans, and I won't do that again. I want to make sure that there's lots of avenues to get in touch with me, either here or by email or text. Maybe I'll even do a regular radio spot like the current premier is doing. Maybe my old bosses will have me back on Saturday mornings. But the other thing too is I think we need to embrace the vision of some of our earlier leaders. I mean, I talked about the need for infrastructure spending. That was something that Ed Stelmach brought to us. He knew how important it was to invest in municipalities. We need to be debt free again. That was part of my identity as an Albertan, is that we were debt free and proud of it. And we need to steward those resources. That when Peter Lougheed set aside 30% of our resource revenue, gosh, I think about what if we had just maintained that all the way through the good times and the bad. What a different position we'd be in today. So I think we've got some great legacy leaders that give us some good ideas about where we need to go as we look forward to the future. And when I look forward to the future, I see an Alberta that in a few years' time is going to be the second largest economy. We're going to be the most prosperous province in the country when it comes to per capita wealth. When I look forward, I see that we're continuing to grow our population, because Alberta is a place where we invite people from around the world. Doesn't matter your background, your religion. If you've got and a good idea, you can come here, you can prosper, you can be part of your community, you can succeed, you can start a business, you can raise your family, and you can thrive. That's the thing that makes Alberta just so unique and wonderful as we build out our communities in both the cities and also in rural Alberta. And so when I look at that we're going to continue to be a magnet for attraction, and we're going to grow, we're going to double our population. by 2050. We're going to be 9 million people. And if we're going to do that, that means that we've got to build more schools and hospitals and roads. And we're going to make sure that we've got the tradesmen to be able to support that and attracting the talent to support that. It means we're going to need more education assistants and nurses and teachers and doctors and other frontline workers. And so I don't think that anybody has to have any reason to be concerned about the vision for the future. I think we can have it all, that we can continue to grow, prosper, generate wealth for ourselves, generate enough revenue for government so that we can pay for the services that we care about. And I think we got to just shake off the funk. We've had 8 years of tough times. If we push back on Ottawa and we say, no, look, you're going to benefit too when we're prosperous and wealthy. You always have. Now just get in your lane. Let us be in ours. Let us do what we do best. Then everybody is going to prosper. We can change the country if we change the way that Ottawa treats us because we change the way we act towards them. I'm tired of us being a junior player. We are going to be a senior partner, and we got to start acting like it. We've got to start acting now. That's why I put Alberta first as my campaign right from the beginning. That's why every policy you see me release is about putting Alberta first. And so I've constantly asked people, if you agree with me, go online, daniellesmith.ca, buy a membership, and let's get this on.
I can tell you that my family's in the lineup and it's growing with people behind you. Danielle, thanks for doing this tonight. I'll give you some time. I know you're going to take a few days break and you'll be reaching out to members, I'm sure, in the days and weeks ahead. Bless you. Have a great night. Good to talk to you as always.
Thanks so much, Bruce. I appreciate everything you do.
You bet. Now, I want to remind you at home, if you want to support Danielle, you want to buy membership, time is running out. You've got until midnight to do that tonight. Go to daniellesmith.ca, buy a membership, become a UCP member. You have to be a UCP member to vote for the UCP leader in the next premier of this province. And give you a heartfelt plea to vote for Danielle and give her your support. Tremendous leader. Took on all those questions tonight. She's been doing this for weeks, traveling the province. So thank you for being with us tonight. It's been my pleasure. It's been my honor to ask some questions and to participate in this. I'm sure we'll see you down the road, and stay safe, whatever you're doing. Bless you. Good night.